Great.
All right, thank you very much. And thank you guys all for being here. I see lots of familiar faces, so that's always good. So I am Heidi Ackerman, formerly known as Heidi Dittmer, so hopefully that wasn't too much of a surprise to you guys. Anyhow, so as Dr. Manu said, I work for the NRCS now. I'm a soil conservationist. And the NRCS is let's see. Oh, nope. Okay. The NRCS is an agency of the USDA that works with primarily soil conservation. We were originally formed as actually the Soil Erosion Service and quickly changed our name to the Soil Conservation Service to put that positive spin on it. And then we changed our name to the Natural Resources Conservation Service in the 1990s. So a lot of us have dads that still call it the SCS. So that is what I'm talking about right now. So we do work obviously with soil conservation. We also have been doing a lot more with water conservation. We all know that water quality and quantity, but particularly in our state, quality is a bigger issue, and that those water issues are gaining in importance and really getting more attention than they have in the past. So we as the NRCS are getting into some more of that as well. And actually a lot of what we do, first of all, I should say that we do private lands, voluntary conservation. So we work directly with farmers and landowners to implement conservation practices on their land. So mostly what I do, since I work in Dallas County, which is just west of Des Moines. So we're at the very southern end of the Des Moines lobe there. A little bit of our county is off of the lobe, but mostly we're on the Des Moines lobe. So if you know about the Des Moines lobe, you know that it's really flat. There's not a lot of topography going on. So most of what we do is trying to address water quality and sheet and rill erosion. We have very little gully erosion to speak of. So whereas in other parts of the state you might have people with cattle and with huge gullies and more interesting rotations and stuff, in Dallas County it's basically corn and soybeans, fence row to fence row. The only cows that you see are usually in some sort of a structure. They're not actually out on pasture. And we also don't have really any place to put a good pond either. So a lot of what we do is cover crops right now. We've done a lot with saturated buffers and bioreactors as well. But again, it's on a voluntary basis with private lands conservation. So that's the main thing that I wanted to get across right now. We work with several different partners. As the USDA, obviously we're going to have a lot of close relationships with other USDA agencies. And the Farm Service Agency at the bottom here is kind of our sister agency. We share buildings with them. So my office, the building where I work, there's an NRCS side and there's an FSA side. And that services all of Dallas County. So those two agencies share a building. And that's how it is in almost every county in Iowa. I guess I can't speak to beyond Iowa's borders what that situation looks like, but we do work closely with FSA. And Farm Service Agency also fairly recently changed their name, and a lot of us have dads who still call it the ASCS office, and I actually can't even tell you what that stands for. I should look that up. But anyhow, they're the ones where you certify your crops, and you might get a check for, well, the recent administration issued direct payments to farmers to help with the economic hits from the Chinese tariffs. So FSA is the ones who handled that. So monetary things that farmers need from the government typically comes from FSA. So starting up at the top here, We work closely with the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, which I will call IDALS. And I will apologize for all the acronyms on these slides, but I work in the government and that's all we do is acronyms. So with IDALS, IDALS actually provides the NRCS county office with a secretary, most times, and the State Department of Agriculture also provides some funding for some of the projects that we want to do. So we can pull from their funds, particularly for cover crops and water quality things. They also provide some cost share for structural practices as well. And when I say structural practices, I'm talking about ponds and terraces. We also sometimes work with the DNR, not as much as you would probably expect considering how similar our names are. But my experience is that we work with the DNR on forestry things and wildlife things. So when we have a landowner who is interested in conserving resources on their property, and one of those resources that they're interested in conserving happens to be wildlife, then we call somebody from DNR to help us develop a plan and figure out what would be the best fit for them. Soil and water conservation districts are the county level organization of 5 elected people. You actually get to vote for those people, so I definitely recommend that you, I don't know, consider that. Flip over your ballot the next time you go to an election. It's usually on the back, like the very last thing. Vote for a soil and water district commissioner. The board is made up of 5 people, and they don't have a lot of ability to say no to things, but they do choose what to fund with state cost share. So when a farmer comes into our office and says that they want to build a pond for livestock, and somebody else comes in a couple weeks later and says that they want to build terraces on their farm so that they have less erosion happening, the district commissioners would actually look at those applications and decide which of those to fund, or if they want to fund both of those at a partial rate or whatever. So they are part of the system that doles out state cost share dollars. In some counties, the district actually has its own employees. That's fairly rare for Iowa because our district commissioners do not have taxing authority. The only way that they can get funds is basically by like fundraising, writing grants, purchasing like a seed drill and renting it out. That's kind of a common thing that districts will do. But they have to basically create funds themselves. They don't get a tax to build up their funds. So typically the districts that have their own employees are like Polk County and Johnson County, more urban places, and they might have an urban conservationist. Maybe it'll be in even a more rural place and it'll be a watershed coordinator that's funded on grant money. So that's how we work with those. Conservation Districts of Iowa is the overarching organization that unites all of the conservation districts together. So there are 100 different soil and water conservation districts in Iowa, because Pottawatomie County has 2. And CDI is the one that unites them all, kind of helps them coordinate. And finally, sometimes we partner with Pheasants Forever. Every once in a while, they will put a wildlife biologist into one of our offices, kind of like what I was talking about with the DNR. They can help us to develop plans about or concerning wildlife and how to best develop habitat for them. Okay, I know this is kind of boring and it feels like it's getting out into the weeds, but it is going to be a little bit important when I come back to it. So focusing on the left side of the screen here, as far as the NRCS organizational structure. In a field office, so I'm talking a county office, we typically have a district conservationist, which is kind of the boss of the office, a soil conservationist, that's what I am. I interact with farmers a lot. I go out to their farms. I help to write plans with them. And a plan would be like a conservation plan. So it's kind of all encompassing all the stuff that they want to do. And then after we have that, then we would write a contract that would be for one of our programs. Well, it doesn't really matter, but for one of our financial assistance programs. So that's typically what a soil conservationist will do. A technician would oftentimes help the DC or the soil con to figure out logistics for more engineering type things. So if a soil con says, okay, well, we've got this farmer over here who wants to terrace this whole field, the technician would come out with me and say, well, we can terrace part of it, or we can terrace the whole thing, that's great, or this really isn't a field that can be terraced. And after they make that decision, then they do the survey and they draw up the plans and that sort of thing. And I, as a soil con, might help them with the survey and design, but the technician is usually the one with more of the experience and the authority to do that. The conservation assistant is the secretary who's usually provided to the office through IDOLs. Again, that's the state level. And then the watershed coordinators, like I mentioned, those are typically funded through state grant money to the district to be able to hire. And you may or may not see a watershed coordinator in an office. But that just kind of illustrates the different roles that we're pulling from. So the district conservationist is managing people more than anything. The soil conservationist is working directly with farmers and doing that planning and trying to be a jack of all trades, knowing a little bit about agronomy and engineering and wildlife and biology and hydrology and everything. And then you've got the technician who really knows their engineering stuff and can get that cranked out, and then the secretary who always saves the day. And then the watershed coordinators. If you have a watershed coordinator, typically they work in just the boundaries of their own watershed, trying to implement whatever practices their watershed plan has called for. So that's been a big push within the last few years that we're organizing on a watershed basis. There's an assessment done of the whole watershed to look at what the resources are, what the concerns are, and then there's kind of a prescription written for like, this is what we need to get better water quality, if that was the goal. Or if we just have, let's say there's a lot of sediment in the water, or we have a lake that's silting in, then the plan would say that we need to have a lot more soil conservation practices in the watershed. So the watershed coordinator would be working from that plan directly with farmers to get those practices in place. Now, there's a lot of other NRCS staff that's kind of above and beyond the county scope. A farm bill specialist is a contract manager, essentially, and they work over several counties. A resource conservationist, kind of hard to describe. They end up, they're supposed to know a lot about agronomy and just kind of like our rules, kind of internal rules. So they interpret a lot of things for us. And then there's the area versions of those things. There's also the area level agronomist, engineer, soil scientist. By the way, soil scientists are kind of a dying breed in the NRCS, which I find very depressing as somebody who studied soil science. But yeah, there's a big variety if you go beyond the county scope is what I'm trying to express here. All right, so back to me. How did I get to where I am? I started out in high school. I joined FFA and I started soil judging from there. That was my gateway drug. And so after, I was a senior in high school trying to decide what to do with my life from there. Obviously, I was going to come to Iowa State, but what was I going to study? Well, I asked, do they have soil judging anywhere? And they said, yes, it's in the agronomy department. I was like, well, that's where I'm going then. So the soil judging thing kind of weaves in throughout my story. So I stayed in the agronomy program, graduated with a bachelor's in that. I was on the soil judging team for 2 years as an undergrad, maybe 2.5. And then in graduate school, I stayed here mostly because I couldn't get enough of this place. Did my master's in soil science with Rick, and I also added ag ed because I realized something really interesting about myself. I'm not very good at science. So I'm really good at education though. And so when I realized that like social science is also needed and education is really important and it is valuable to study, I decided to pair those two things. So I can look at soils and describe them all day, but as far as quantifying things, that's kind of where I don't have those strengths. Okay, so why did I go to graduate school? Well, I really enjoyed being in academia. I loved being able to go to lectures by all kinds of different experts, and I wasn't ready to give that up. So I thought, I like this. It seems to be a good fit. I also just love going to class and taking notes on all kinds of stuff. I would take some pretty obscure classes, and again, wasn't ready to give that up. I also couldn't decide exactly what I wanted to do. So, I had actually interned with the NRCS for 3 summers at that point, and the final nail in the coffin was they hadn't passed the Farm Bill when I graduated. So I just stayed here and decided to get some extra education, which I'm really glad that I did. I did a lot of learning. I took way more classes than they tell you that you should take as a grad student. Rick is nodding. I did a lot of teaching. So I taught 154 with Dr. Manu, and I also co-coached the soil judging team throughout grad school. And I ended up doing research, not in a way that most of you guys probably do. My project for grad school was that I taught a course in soil science as a continuing education thing for teachers, high school teachers. So I went through the whole process of getting credits for the attendees and writing the curriculum and teaching it and all of that. And then I did an analysis of how beneficial that course was for the people who attended it. And finally, I did a lot of networking. Seriously, conferences are incredible and they go a long way in life. So every once in a while, I would feel guilty about missing classes to go to conferences, but don't. Go to the conferences. They're great. I think you guys know that though. But most importantly, as I kind of hinted to, I learned about myself that I am not the kind of person who should be measuring things in a lab. That's just not me, and that's fine. So that kind of helped me decide where to go. So then I was wondering, should I continue research? Well, probably not, at least not in the sense that I had been thinking. Teaching is really fun, but I don't have a high school teaching certificate. I could teach at a community college, but not in the high school. Don't ask why Iowa is this way, but it is. And then I could just get a more traditional job in sales, be an agronomist for somebody, go into the public sector, maybe do some sort of work for an organization or something. And then I finally ended up deciding on coming back to the NRCS. And some of the things that I love about the NRCS are that I do get to work directly with farmers. We get to do a lot of interesting and creative outreach too, and especially again with the watershed projects that are going on. That just opens the door to a new kind of conversation that we can have with people, and it also opens up a group of people that wouldn't necessarily even know that the NRCS exists, but we can help with our expertise to influence some of the decisions that they make. Not in a bad way, obviously, but we can help to inform decisions that people are making in watershed groups, which is really cool. Also, by working for the NRCS, you have access to most farms, which, as somebody who loves to learn, that's pretty cool. Like, I can go out to any farm that is registered in the farm program, and for sure any farm that has a CRP contract on it, Conservation Reserve Program. So that is basically a set-aside program through our sister agency, FSA, where people will seed down an area and cease cropping it for a while. And it's really fun to go out to those places to see how prairie reconstruction is working and various different kinds of plantings like that. You can learn a lot about weed and plant identification out in those places. So there's just some fun stuff like that that just really kind of livens up the work. We do a huge variety of stuff, which sometimes is frustrating, but sometimes it's just kind of a breath of fresh air that you're not doing the same thing over and over again. So like I said, we do terraces, we do ponds, we help develop grazing systems. So if somebody comes into our office and says, hey, the price of corn stinks, I want to get out of this, what should I do? I've got a lot of time on my hands, so kind of open to whatever. Maybe grazing beef cattle in a rotational system is what they need, and that can be really complex. There's a lot of fencing, there's a lot of watering, a lot of feeding involved in that, and that can be really fun. So you can kind of release your creativity in some of those kinds of projects, but there is still a lot of calculation that you have to do too. Like we have to have an engineer help us to design the watering pipeline for the grazing system. So a lot of this stuff is fairly intense, but I mean, it's the government. We've got handbooks for everything. So if you can find where the rules are, then there's a lot of good guidance out there for you. So it's not like you're just kind of out there on your own. And finally, not finally, I have more slides, but it's really cool that working for the NRCS, we have a direct and lasting impact on the land. If we help to build a pond, it's going to be there for at least 30 years. And if we help to implement a grazing system, it's going to be there for probably at least 10 years. If we're helping to plan CRP, there's some CRP out there right now that has been in the program since 1985. So, you know, you could have a multi-generational impact on the land and see the kind of benefits that our predecessors had on the land before we got there. And then, you know, obviously, as with anything, we learn this in a lot of classes. Sometimes we learn that the things that happened in the past weren't the best choices, but now we know better, so we can do better. And that's part of the nice thing too, is that, you know, eventually something stops working or we learn better and we can do something over again. We can rebuild a pond if it's not built to standards or whatever. So those lasting impacts are really cool to see, especially when you're out driving around in a county that you used to work in or something. Some of the frustrating things about working for the NRCS is that it's a government agency. It's pretty slow to respond, but I'm beginning to appreciate that a lot because we don't make snap decisions. The NRCS isn't going to say, oh, somebody in Ames is inventing saturated buffers. Let's just get right on that and put them out in every field everywhere. No, they had to go through a lot of rigorous testing and measurements and a lot of experimentation to figure out what works and why does it work. And should we be doing this in a lot of places? Where are the good places to do this? We make sure that we're doing responsible things with our staff time and with tax dollars. So it takes a while. Plus we have to write our own rules. So once we've established that a practice is going to be beneficial to put out on the land, we have to develop rules for, you know, where can it go, what are, how big does it have to be, that sort of thing. And sometimes you're in the middle of a farm bill and there's just not the flexibility to do what you want with the current farm bill. Typically the life cycle of a farm bill isn't so long that that's the most critical factor, but yeah, that can be a little bit frustrating, especially at first, to see that you're hearing about something really exciting and new, but you can't really tell anybody to do it yet just because your agency wouldn't back you. And this is kind of the double-edged sword part of it. You're expected to know a lot about a lot. We have to manage contracts, which I didn't take any sort of contract management classes, so I felt a little bit awkward learning all of that, but it's really not too bad. We need to know some about soil science. Having a master's degree isn't exactly necessary for a soil conservationist position, but again, it opens the door for other things. We do have to know a little bit about engineering, which I really didn't have much experience with that. And then obviously I have a degree in agronomy, so I had a pretty decent understanding of the agronomic principles that I needed to work with. And this is kind of something that I mentioned before, that our agency is resistant to fads and industry pressures. So when there is a new innovation coming out, or when everybody is just kind of like going nuts over some crazy new exciting thing and thinks it's the silver bullet, we're usually the ones sitting in the corner saying, I don't know about that, which is sometimes beneficial because not every idea is a great idea. Okay, so having a master's degree or a PhD and working for the NRCS. First of all, a master's degree qualifies you to begin at a higher pay grade. And this is the pay scale. It wouldn't be a presentation without a screen full of numbers, right? So what I want you to see here is that the grades are on the side, and when you take a position, it's defined by the grade. So the 3 that's circled in yellow is typically where an intern would start, GS3. I unfortunately started as a GS5 soil conservationist, and I was qualified for a GS9. So if you want to work for the NRCS, talk to me about why that happened, because it doesn't have to happen that way. So the 5s, 7s, and 9s are typically for the soil conservationists, maybe for some of the technicians, and civil engineering technicians, which is a step above a regular technician. And then the 11s and 12s is what the district conservationists would be, and some of the more specialized positions. So you would start your new job in the step 1 column, and then after a year you move up to step 2. So what I'm trying to say is there's a fair amount of variation in where you start, and then everybody moves up a year at a time on the pay scale. But if you start like I did as a GS5, it's harder to get up to the GS9 where you want to be, or to get to an 11. But like I said, if you have a master's degree, you are qualified for any GS9 positions that the NRCS advertises. So anything there you can apply for, and you are strictly qualified for it. Additionally, a higher degree might pay off kind of in the long run. So you could do what I did and start out as a lowly soil conservationist, kind of at the worst starting position. But eventually I could jump into a soil scientist position because I still have that degree. Like, even though I'm not using it, it's sitting there. So I could eventually take a soil scientist position, be some sort of other specialist, who knows. They might create a new kind of position that I wouldn't even know what to guess right now. And it's also helpful to kind of pair the education that you have with experience that you get in the agency. Because the agency is so I don't know, it's not pure soil science. It's not pure engineering. It's not pure anything. It's a lot of government mixed into everything else. So it takes a while to get used to that, I guess is what I'm saying. So as you can kind of weave those two things together, then that's what can become most valuable, I believe. And to just kind of upend this whole thing, Iowa is soon going to undergo a reorganization. We were told that we needed to kind of change our numbers somehow, whatever. So my point here is that if you're interested at all in doing private lands, voluntary conservation work directly with farmers, if you're interested in saving the soil and water for future generations, you all are. There are going to be a lot more new positions created, and there's going to be a lot of backfilling going on as people move up. I think there's going to be a lot of change in our agency, particularly in the state of Iowa in the next few years. And of course, on a much less exciting level, every new farm bill comes with some new changes that change how we do our jobs a little bit. It usually doesn't change what our job is, but it changes some kind of minor things about our jobs. So that's an important thing to keep in mind too. If you are interested in working for the NRCS, all hiring is done through usajobs.gov. It really doesn't help at all to call anybody anymore, except for like the one person who's listed as a contact on a particular job listing. So check usajobs.gov. Jobs are only open for a week or less, so you really have to be on the ball. And if you're interested in working for our agency, feel free to contact me. I'll put my information up here at the end. Switching into non-career work, I am the president of the Iowa chapter of the Soil and Water Conservation Society, which is a professional organization that's pretty unique in that it joins academic professionals and people like me who are practicing what the scientists are telling us to do. And we also have several farmers who are members. So we've got this really interesting mix of people that are members of our society. And I really enjoy working with all of these different people. The networking potential is incredible. And obviously it's something I'm pretty passionate about, and I think you guys probably are too. So conserving soil and water is starting to become a little bit more popular, and we're getting some cool new videos and more press and stuff, which is exciting. And so I think that our society will probably benefit a little bit from that in the long run. But really, I mean, it's a fun thing to do, if nothing else. We have meetings regularly. There are usually 2 general meetings for everybody to attend annually. And there's a strong emphasis on the social aspect of those. But we also like to tour something. We like to learn about something. You know, if there's a watershed coordinator in the town where we're having a meeting, we're going to go see some of the urban conservation practices that they put in. Because maybe people like me wouldn't see that otherwise. Actually, I work close to Des Moines, so I do get to see a lot of that, but a lot of people don't. It's also fun because you don't have to be an NRCS employee to be part of this. So it's important for me personally to be a member of a society where I can branch out beyond my agency and kind of have a shared enthusiasm for something with other people, but they're not the same people that I work with on a day-to-day basis. So it's fun to be able to collaborate with those people and bounce ideas off of each other and get new things going. So that is all I have for you today, but I would be more than happy to answer any questions that anybody has. And like I said, if anybody wants to know more about the NRCS or working for the NRCS, applying for the NRCS, feel free to contact me any of these ways.